I'm an online fitness coach making 10K a month, but my life wasn't always like this. Growing up, I was probably one of the most insecure kids that you'd ever know, right? I spent most of my life lacking confidence, not really liking myself, and I always just felt like different than everyone. I always felt different, and I always just never really fit in with the people that I hung out with. I was a really socially awkward kid. I didn't really know like social cues or anything like that. I didn't really know how to like read the room, as a kid. I had really bad ADHD, and I struggled a lot with building connections, making friends, and actually finding people, who I could mesh with, right? Because most of my life I spent playing baseball, right? My entire life I had dedicated towards becoming a better baseball player. From a young kid when I was 3, 4 years old, baseball as a whole was my entire life. That was the first sport that I ever played as a kid. It was my pride, it was my joy, and the only thing that I ever wanted to do, as a kid was play college baseball, play professional baseball. That was like my lifelong goal. I wanted more for myself. I wanted to be someone special. I wanted to achieve extraordinary things, and baseball was that extraordinary thing that I wanted. And growing up, right, like that was everything to me. That was like the only thing that I ever really focused on. I struggled so much with having friends. I struggled so much with like finding a group of people that I really meshed with, that baseball was almost like my escape, right? I would spend extra time, down at the cages, doing extra T work or doing extra flips, or taking BP with my dad, or one or two of my old teammates. Right, but that was it. That was all the socializing that I really did. Then I get to middle school, and I went to an all boys middle school when I was in middle school. All boys from the time that I was in fourth grade to the time that I was in eighth grade. I went to this like all boys like elementary school slash middle school. Um, I had a family connection, to that school, and I ended up getting like a really good rate and really cheap rate of going to this like private middle school. So I was very blessed with the opportunity to do that. I was there for 5 years. I got bullied a lot throughout middle school. I was like actually the really skinny kid growing up, right? Fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. I used to get picked on in middle school in sixth grade English class by this kid named Kevin, who was like a foot taller than me, right? He weighed probably 30, 40 pounds more than me, and I would always get picked on by this kid, and like that broke me a lot. And for a long time, I dealt with a lot of hard things. I dealt with depression, I dealt with anxiety a lot, especially in middle school. That was like the worst of the worst. And something that I look back on now, and I realized that that those were like the monumental moments that really shaped me. I learned how to grow as a man. I learned how to deal with my thoughts, my anxieties, my worries, and I learned that from a really young age because of the bullying that I went through when I was in middle school, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And while I was in middle school too, I started a YouTube channel that I actually got a lot of hate for. I used to stream Call of Duty. I used to make YouTube videos. I don't think any of my YouTube videos are still on YouTube, but my app was like Webby because my last name's Webster, and that was something that I really loved to do. I loved making YouTube videos, and that's why I still make videos to this day, because it's something that I really enjoy to do. I really enjoy making videos every day, and helping people. And at the time, the thing that I liked to do was make YouTube videos about Call of Duty. I made a few about Pokemon Go when that game came out in middle school, and that's something that I had always loved to do. But it's something that I also got a lot of hate for when I was in middle school. I had one kid who like made a diss track about me in middle school, and like hating on me. It was a whole mess, and that was the same kid who used to bully me, back in middle school, and it was a crazy experience, like having to go through all that, just getting bullied. I started a YouTube channel, wanted to be a YouTuber for a couple of years, streaming Call of Duty Zombies, streaming multiplayers, recording Pokemon Go and playing it on there. And that was probably the most fun that I'd ever had, but it was also the most depressed and anxious that I'd ever had as well in my life. And then I get to high school, freshman year. I ended up going to this like boarding school, right? I went to this boarding school called Lawrence Academy, and you know there was an option so that I could be a day student. I could just go to school during the day and then come home, or I could live there full time and board full time. And freshman year, I was a day student, right? My older sister, she went there as well, so she would like drive me to school every day, and it was fun, right? But ninth grade was probably the worst mental headspace that I'd ever been in, right? I found myself just like constantly chasing women, especially freshman year of high school. I was always just chasing women, right? I really lacked fulfillment, in my life. I got to high school, and I got to high school baseball, and it was like a whole step above, middle school baseball. Like that jump from middle school baseball to high school baseball was insane. And I realized how quickly, I was like undersized. I realized how quickly that I wasn't going to be like a starter. I wasn't going to be one of the best players on the team. In fact, I was probably one of the worst players on the team my freshman year. And that like led me into an even further downward spiral of depression. And, it got to the point where I just like, I completely hated my life. Right. And I tried to drown it out with women. I started talking to as many girls as possible. I wasn't like hooking up with them, but I was, coping for the fact that, I hated my life so much that I would just try to talk to as many women as possible because it made me feel good. I really liked the validation from talking to girls because I didn't really give myself that validation. Right? I didn't have anything to validate in my own life. I looked like shit, felt like shit, I ate like shit. My life was just in shambles, right? So I was searching for that validation elsewhere, and I found it through women. I loved the attention that girls gave me and the attention that these women gave me all the time, so I constantly craved it over and over and over again. And I was just talking to countless women at a time, and I look back on that, and I'm so not proud of, the way that I was, especially my freshman year of high school, and like the person that I was. And sophomore year of college, I transferred to actually being a boarding student at my high school. Right, I was a day student my freshman year, a boarding school my sophomore year, because I just wanted to switch things up. Right, I love my parents. I love living at home. Right, but I felt like at the time what I needed most was to get away. Right, to start building myself. Right, I was like 15, 16 at the time, and sophomore year of college comes around. I'm like, okay, like I want to go board. I'm gonna have a random roommate, and I'm just gonna kind of live on my own. So I started boarding, that year. That was also the same year that COVID was. So I was 16 years old. Um, Kind of the same thing, honestly, right? Our baseball season got canceled because it was COVID that year, so that was pretty depressing for me as well. I really struggled a lot with my mental health in early high school. Later high school, was a lot better, but freshman and sophomore year was probably one of the worst times in my life. Sophomore year, I was just constantly playing video games. I had found the gym for the first time. I had stepped foot in the gym because I saw how unmatched I was in high school baseball. So the only thing I wanted to do was get as big as possible, get as strong as possible, so that I could actually like compete with everyone, right? Because I was always the really undersized guy. I was always the really skinny guy, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually compete with these guys, because that was something that I had never been able to do up until that point. Junior year of high school, I got into a relationship with this girl from a town over from me, and that was probably the most clingy that I'd ever been to a girl. I only dated this girl for about 6 months, but we hung out pretty much every single day. I like didn't have a life without her at the time, right? Life was easy. It was peak COVID, right? I was doing my classes from home on my laptop. I could take them from anywhere. I could take them from my bedroom. I could take them from my desk. I could take them from this girl's house, and that's honestly what I did most of the time. Like I was so attached to this girl's hip, and this is kind of like the downward spiral, of my life, right? Started getting really attached to this girl junior year, beginning of junior year. We dated from like September of that year to March of that year. And like I said, I found myself being really clingy because of the fact that like I didn't really have a life outside of her, right? School was out, baseball was out, so the only thing that I was literally doing was hanging out with this girl nonstop, or I was literally just playing Call of Duty and playing video games at home, right? That was literally the extent of my life. There was nothing else going on but girls and video games because baseball was canceled, so those are the only two things that I really had. And February of that year, 6 months after I started dating this girl, it was really toxic, like on and off. I was a really toxic boyfriend. I was a horrible boyfriend, and that just kind of came from the insecurities that I had. Right, I was a really insecure guy, and everything that a girl would do would, activate my anxious attachment style. Right, this girl would like go to Maine with her friends for a weekend and hang out with a bunch of random guys who I had no idea anything about. I didn't know who they were. She was like hiding it from me sometimes, and that really activated my anxious attachment style because I was constantly thinking that she was cheating on me. So I was constantly lashing out at her. And I look back and I realized the fact that the only reason that ever happened was because of one of my insecurity, but the reason I was insecure was because I had nothing to be secure about. Because at the time, I wasn't really living a life. I was just playing video games, right? I was in mediocre shape. I was 17, right? I could have been in decent shape. I could have been in okay shape, right? I had the ability to have a decent body, which would have led to a decent mind, but I didn't prioritize it. That wasn't really something that I tried to do, right? So I had this terrible body, didn't really have a life. I was playing video games. I was only hanging out with this girl, and there was one time where she went to a party at one of her ex-boyfriend's house, and that was probably, I should have, at that point, I should have just been like, all right, what are we doing? It was like a Halloween party at her ex-boyfriend's house. And I was like, okay, yeah, no worries, just go. And, the funny thing about that is, we ended up breaking up, about 6 months later, February, I think it was like the next year, right? So 6 months after we started dating in September. And, I was pretty depressed, honestly. For a good couple of weeks, I was really depressed. And the next thing that I did was I hopped right into another relationship, right? February, we broke up. I was in another relationship by, like, April. I had, like, 5 to 6 weeks of just, like, being by myself, looking for a woman, right? I was constantly just searching for more and more women. I was never just, like, content with being by myself because I hated myself, right? The problem that you have, right? And the problem that you face with you want to, like, have all these women, like, you want to find the right woman, but to a certain degree, if you go out of your way too much to find a woman, it's because you're not secure in yourself, right? You're not comfortable with being by yourself and being alone, and that's something I struggled with for so long. I never wanted to be alone. I never wanted to be by myself. I never felt complete unless I had a girlfriend. I just felt like I was like a half of a man, right? And I felt like, okay, I was like this half, and I needed this half of a girl to make one whole. And if I wasn't talking to a girl, if I wasn't dating a girl, if I wasn't Snapchatting a girl, I felt anxious all the time. It felt like something was missing from my life. I didn't have anything to be confident about. I didn't have anything to be secure about. And because of it, I was constantly searching for that security and that confidence in other women to give to me. I wanted these women to validate me. And that's the biggest struggle that, I went through, especially my junior year. Senior year, I was still dating that one girl who I rebounded with, my junior year. We were dating. And that was like on and off for, about a year. Then we broke up, and, I ended up skipping prom that year because I got dumped like 2 weeks before prom started. I was down in the dumps. I was depressed. I really liked that girl at the time. And, I was depressed. I didn't want to go to prom. And then I rebounded again with another girl. I started dating another girl a couple weeks later. And, I dated her for about a month, and then we broke up, and then I went back to the last girl. Like, I just couldn't be alone in high school. And I really look back on it, and I really regret the decisions that I made, going out with all these women. I wish I found the one woman for me sooner. because I felt like I was constantly just like searching for more and more and more, and I could never just like find the one for me. Graduated high school and on to my freshman year of college, and my freshman year of college is probably another really bad year for me. I'll be so honest. I get to freshman year of college, right, and then I make this jump from high school baseball to college baseball. I'm like, oh shit, like now I'm even more outmatched, right? I was just like I was a normal weight going into college. I was like 190 pounds. I was just a normal dude, right, normal guy, and going in there, right. They always have this freshman 15, right? They think every like freshman that goes to college just automatically puts on a bunch of weight, and that was literally me. All right, I get there and I wasn't as good as all the other guys on my baseball team. So I had this mentality of, okay, like let me go on, a bulk, right? Let me put on a bunch of muscle, a bunch of size, and that's gonna get me the result that I want. And I'm gonna be a better baseball player. And then I put on like probably 10 to 15 pounds. Probably got up to 205, and I was feeling good, right? I was bloated all the time, right? I didn't have abs. I didn't look good, but like I felt like my testosterone was high. I felt like I was, a much better baseball player because, a baseball player, we didn't have to be ripped, right? We didn't have to have a shredded six pack. We didn't have to have abs. We just had to be strong, mobile, and we just had to be able to move fast. So I didn't have a six pack, 205, and freshman year, our baseball season comes around and I didn't play at all. I was garbage. I had this thing called like the yips, like all my freshman year of college. It was so bad. It was like I was playing with so much performance anxiety. I was playing with so much anxiety every day when I played, and anxiety is still something that I struggle with to this day. It's not as bad as it was, but it's still something that I struggle with to this day. But it was really bad freshman year of college. I was constantly stressed out. I was constantly anxious about making a mistake in game, and I would play this with this like crazy performance anxiety every single day. And it was something that I really struggled with a lot. And my coach noticed it, right? My teammates noticed it, and he never ended up really playing me my freshman year. I wasn't that good, and that was pretty depressing for me. So I kind of stayed in that like 205 pound range all the way up until my sophomore year. Beginning of sophomore year, I was like, okay, like I gotta make a change, right? Something's gotta change, right? And I can't be this like big, chubby, slow dude anymore. Like, okay, I got to get in a little bit better shape. So I lost a few pounds, probably got down to like 195, 200. I only lost like 5, 8, 10 pounds. And then and then I got into a relationship with a girl just 2 months after, my sophomore year of college started, November. And this is probably like the biggest, the biggest change that ever happened, right? I started dating this girl my sophomore year of college, and everything was great. Dated for just under a year, I'd say, just under a year. We would go out, we would hang out all the time, but the problem is like we would like always eat junk food. We would always be eating Skittles and Doritos, and we'd be going out to the movies and getting slushies and popcorn. And as fun as it was, right, I ended up just like completely losing myself all over again, right? The first 2 months of college of sophomore year, like I told myself I wanted to figure things out and I wanted to become a better baseball player and I wanted to figure myself out mentally and physically, and I just never did, right? I ended up dating that girl, and that just took me completely out of my spiral. Like I fell for this girl so hard. I really liked this girl. I thought she was perfect. Thought she was the girl that I was going to be with for the rest of my life. And, just like a couple weeks in, right, we have like an argument, right? And she threatens to break up with me. I'm like, no, I'm like begging her not to leave me, right? And this is the problem that I ran into so many times, throughout my relationships, and especially in that relationship, was I was begging, right? A girl would, talk to, I would be dating that girl, right? And, she'd be like, okay, like, I want to break up with you, right? This happened or that happened. Like, I want to break up with you. And then we'd be sitting there for like 2-3 hours having a conversation like, no, please don't break up with me. Like, I'll do anything, right? And, this is something that happened so many times in relationships. And this was probably the worst one that ever happened, right? This was every single time, right? Every single like couple of weeks, maybe every month and a half, we'd always have an argument, and she would always just wanted to break up with me. And I was constantly begging and fighting for her to come back because I knew that if this girl left me, I was going to feel so bad about myself. Right? Because I had all these experiences from high school where, I'd be dating a girl and I'd be having to date her because I struggled so much with my independence, and I always had to have a girl by my side or else I didn't really feel whole. So I knew that, if this girl breaks up with me, I was going to go into a crazy depression and be so anxious all the time. So I begged her to not leave. Every single time that she brought up that conversation, I begged her not to leave. And, that literally continued on and off for almost a year. November 2024. That's when we broke up. And that wasn't even that long ago, right? Not even 2 years ago. Crazy how fast things change, right? November 2024, this girl breaks up with me. I was broken. This is probably the most broken I'd ever been, right? We'd been fighting on and off for, almost a year, and it got to the point where she pulled the trigger. I tried to beg her to come back, and she didn't. And that was probably one of the most pivotal moments of my whole life, right? Because I was in probably the worst mental space possible. I felt like I was at rock bottom. Like, that was literally my rock bottom, and literally there's no way that anything could have gotten any worse than that. Right? I was struggling mentally. I'd found out that, I wasn't going to be a starter, my junior year of college on my D3 baseball team. Like, I was already not that great of a player, and I went to D3 baseball, and I also wasn't a starter. So I was like, okay, I'm not a starter, so the biggest passion in my life, I wasn't even going to do, right? If I'm not a starter on my D3 college baseball team, there's no way I'm going to be able to play professional baseball, right? That was kind of the mindset that I had. I was like, okay, there's actually no way, right? One, I wasn't that good, and I was insane, right? I convinced myself I was good, but I knew deep down that I wasn't. I was lying to myself. And then this girl dumps me, right? So I'm single, heartbroken. I got dumped, found out that, I'm probably not going to play professional baseball, and found out that, I'm not going to be a starter that year. So I was like, okay, what do I have? Nothing. And I fell into this like deep depression for the next couple of months, right? December, I was still trying to play baseball. I was still playing and pushing myself to become as good as possible. December, January, we start back up in school, and, I was drowning myself out. I went out multiple times, December, January of 2024 into 2025. Right as I turned 21 years old, I was going out, partying, getting rinsed at, bars. I went to Florida, over that winter break to play some baseball with some of my friends in Tampa, Florida. And we went out that weekend, and, I just got rinsed. I just talked to girls, and, it was just a whole mess. And I look back and I really regret it. And, that was probably the most pivotal moment of my life. That November, December, January era, and then February comes around, and we start really getting into baseball, right? And I get to this point where I realize, okay, I'm not going to be a starter, right? I don't have a relationship right now. So what do I have? I have nothing right now. And, I had this moment where, I was taking my shirt off. I was going to go shower one night. And, I walk in the bathroom, close the door, I take my shirt off, I have my towel in my other hand, and my shirt in one hand. I'm taking it off, right? And, I sit there, and I just stare at myself. And I stare at the body that I had, and I stare at the body that, I was living in. I got up to between 215 and 220 pounds. Because throughout that relationship that I was in with that girl, I put on a lot of weight. Tons of weight. Right, and I thought I was putting on muscle, but I just put on fat. And I looked at myself, and I just started crying. I literally started crying. I looked at my body, and I was like, my body sucks. I have nothing. I'm single. I'm broken. I'm depressed, and I'm not a college baseball, and I'm not going to be a starter on my college baseball team. I had literally nothing going for me. I had nothing. My life was nothing. I literally had nothing going for me in my life, and that was probably the biggest moment in and of itself. The biggest turning moment. That was like my light bulb moment. Like, okay, you know what? My life can't get any worse. Like, something's got to change, right? But I thought to myself, okay, like, what's actually going to change? Like, what can I actually do? Right? I thought about, there's nothing you can do about the relationship. She's already dating some other girl, some other guy. And, I was like, okay, I can't really do anything about my baseball thing, right? Because I'm not a starter. There's not much I can do about that right now. So I was like, okay. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, you know what? Literally the only thing that I can do right now is change my body, right? Because that was literally the thing that I looked at when I was crying in the mirror. I was like, okay, like let me change my body, right? So, but then I thought to myself, I was like, how the hell am I going to change my body, right? I've seen these like dudes on social media who had crazy six packs and had crazy physique, but I was like, okay, they must be genetically, gifted, right? They must have something that I don't. They must have all these steroids and all these other things, and I coped with myself. Coped with the fact that, I had a bad physique, and I told myself that I had all these, dispositions that were preventing me from actually getting ripped and getting a six pack, that I didn't really accept the harsh truth of the fact of the matter was that I just wasn't willing to figure it out, right? So I started using ChatGPT plans, I started using Google, I started using AI, right? And I'm like, okay, like, what am I actually going to do, right? Because I could stick with it for a couple of days, and, then I'd go off my plan, and then I'd binge, and then I'd eat some crazy food, right? And then I'd go out with my family later on the week, and I was gaining weight, and I was like, okay, but I'm literally following the ChatGPT plan. Like, why is this not working? Oh, but I didn't realize the fact that I wasn't able to stay consistent. The ChatGPT plan was garbage, right? The macros were all screwed up. The calories weren't even right. So I was like, okay, I lost all my trust in AI, right? AI is not the method, right? And, even if I made my own plan, I wasn't even able to stay consistent with it. One, because I didn't even know how to make a plan. Two, if I did make a plan, I'd stay consistent with for, 2 or 3 days. Like, this isn't working. And then I'd go eat, like, an ice cream sandwich or something. Bang, progress gone. All right, so I was like, okay. Clearly, I have no idea what I'm doing. Clearly, what I'm doing right now is terrible. So, I found myself, like, scrolling on Instagram a couple days ago, or a couple days later. And, I found this, like, cool Instagram influencer. He had a sick physique. Followed him, right? He was, like, the only influencer that I followed. And I saw his physique, and I saw that he was, like, had, like, coaching applications. I was like, okay. Like, let's see what this is about, right? Let's see what this guy's about. I'd been a baseball player, right? I know what it's like to have a coach because I know the value of a coach and, how much this guy could really help me because it's just like, okay. I had this mentality. It's like, okay, if I had baseball coaches, right, why shouldn't I have a fitness coach, right? If professional athletes have coaches, why shouldn't I have a coach? Like, what's different about me that, all these professional athletes, they'll have coaches, right? And they make millions of dollars and they're probably better than their coaches, yet they still have coaches. So I was like, I had that mentality. And that's what made it so easy for me to be like, okay, you know what? I need a coach, right? I need someone to help me because I had no idea what I was doing. So I hired this coach. He helped me. And he brought me out of this depression that I was in. And I'm so grateful for everything that he gave me. He completely turned my life around. He changed my life, right? I was stuck in this pit. I was depressed all the time, and, he brought me out of that. He got me down to, like, 170 pounds. I was shredded out of my mind. I looked insane. I had ab veins. I was ripped, and I felt amazing. And then I started posting on TikTok, right? I was feeling myself. I started posting my transformation on TikTok, started posting my physique on there, started gaining some traction. A couple of them went viral. Got up to, like, 5,000 followers. I was like, cool, this is sick, right? I have a great physique now that I can post it online, and now I can, like, do something that sounded cool, right? I saw this guy posting on social media, and I was like, okay, like, I want to try that too. I want to try posting too. Seems like, it seems like it's a lot of fun. I started doing that. Did that for, about a year. Made, like, absolutely no money because there's no money just posting your physique on social media. That's not how you make money as an online fitness coach. And, I started researching, like, okay, like, this was kind of fun. Like, I really enjoyed this experience that I had, with this online fitness coach. Like, maybe I can help other guys do the exact same thing that this coach helped me with, because this coach helped me take my life out of such a bad place and bring it into this new light and completely transform my life. So, like, why can't I do the same thing for anybody else? That's when a light bulb went off in my head. Like, I think I want to start this. I think I want to be an online fitness coach. And, I started researching it, how to do it. I started posting on social media for a couple months, started making no money. And I was like, okay, clearly I'm doing something wrong. And, I had this mentality, right? I was like, okay, I already hired a fitness coach to help me fix my fitness. Why shouldn't I hire a business coach to help me build a business, right? It made sense to me in my mind. I was like, okay, clearly if I was already the man capable of building, a 6-figure business, I would have already done it by now. So the fact that I didn't know, I didn't have the result meant that I didn't know how to do it, right? So I put my ego to the side and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to hire this, business coach. I took out a huge loan, several $1,000s. Did not have that money. I probably had like $200 in my bank at the time, hiring this coach. And I took out that huge loan. I put my back up against the wall. And, I made a little bit of money, here and there for the first, 7 months, right? I started the business, October of 2025. And, I made a little bit of money up until, like April, May. And June, I had my first big month. I hit a 17K month, and that completely changed my life. And, I finally realized that, I put my back up against the wall. I forced myself to make it work. I had been posting every single day, multiple times a day for 8 months straight and barely making any money. And, all that work just compounded at once. And I realized one thing in that moment, that you truly can achieve anything you want to achieve. You have the capability of achieving something great, something special, but all that comes down to it is, are you willing to put in the work for long enough? The same thing goes with your fitness journey, right? If you're willing to put in the work every single day, giving your all, eating on a calorie deficit, eating your meal plan, doing your workouts, doing your cardio every single day, and not giving up, you are going to get the result of a great physique. This is literally just my whole life. This is everything that I've struggled with. From, anxiety, depression, stress, being a skinny kid when I was really young, to getting to be the fat kid when I was in college, and, to making, the transformation that I've had now, and, having the business that I have now. And I'm really just grateful for, everything, right? Because, I finally feel like I built myself into some sort of a man, right? I struggled a lot with, feeling like a shell of a man, and feeling like, I didn't really have anything going for me. And now I feel like I have something in my life that's worthy, right? I feel worthy, right? I have people who look up to me, and that's the biggest blessing that I could ever ask for, is the fact that there are genuinely people who want to hear what I have to say. And that's the most humbling thing in the world. Because I just remember being the kid who was always so quiet and always just wanted other people to listen to him, and always wanted other people to be friends with him. And now that I have the ability to, influence and to help so many people, is probably one of the most life-changing things that, I could ever ask for. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about my story, because I basically just told you my entire life story from the moment that I was born all the way up until now, and I'm 22 years old. So hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.